There you go.
Hello, Toby. How are you?
Very well, thanks, David. Nice to see you.
Welcome, welcome. Can you see me all right?
Yeah, no, I see you and hear you loud and clear.
Great stuff. All right, so should we just check in or should we just start straight away?
Up to you. Happy to check in as well?
Okay, check in with me. How are you doing? How's life?
David, life is good, thank you very much. Yeah, life is good. Obviously had a bit of a setback, being ill for a couple of months, but I'm much better now. The last week I finally seem to be getting through into recovery, which is great. I'm just thrilled to have done my Masters. I've got to be honest with you, I'm absolutely thrilled to have finished it and to have done well on it. And it seems a bit surreal. I fetched my graduation certificate last week because, of course, I missed my own graduation because I was in hospital. But it was a bit surreal receiving it from the postman at the back of the university, and it was just quite odd taking it home, and then actually feels quite real. So I'm really chuffed with that. So things are good.
Well done. Really well done on completing that. I think it's important. Is there any way we can improve the light on your face?
Let me try and move. Hold on. There's quite a bit of lighting in this room. I don't know why it's so dark. I don't think that helps either. Has that helped? No. It's a very bright room, so I don't know why it's... No. Back to where I was, I'm afraid.
Good. It's just a place.
I don't know if there's any camera setting that I can get it lighter. I don't think so. That's the best we got, David, I'm afraid.
Okay, mate, no problem.
If I'm closer up, it's better, but you know, I don't have any other lights in here, sadly. It's a very bright room, so I don't know why it's got so dark, unless the camera is compensating for it.
Mm. Okay. So, just finish my mouthful. Right, we've got an hour, yeah? You got an hour?
Yep, I've got all the time you need.
No, they're looking good. All right. We just finished my food. Without choking. Right, let's go. So, Toby, hello, welcome. First of all, well done on completing your Masters and jumping through all the hoops. That's a hell of an achievement, and it certainly brings a lot of credibility to the recovery coaching industry. Well, I'm hoping it does. And really what I want to talk to you about today is your research and what you learned from it, so that we can pass on your wisdom to other students that find themselves where you did with us in the training, like must have been about 4 or 5 years ago. I can't remember when you first started to do the UACT training, but
2.5, yeah.
Yeah, but it's been a hell of a journey for you, and look at you now. So congratulations again, and tell us, what did you learn in what have you discovered?
What have I discovered? I think that the most important thing that I discovered, and I read through the thesis again last night just to kind of refresh myself with it, was that looking at the whole, you know, if one core message comes through the research, which I suspect in many respects is what I wanted to find, but was there in the data, was that recovery coaching was actually all about the coaching.
Tell me more about that.
Well, it's tempting. If you go to the literature, I mean, without going through the literature in detail, but we get to recovery coaching and we don't get any relief. We don't get much further. You know, the last piece of research I looked at was a 2014 piece, so it's current, and it finds moderate evidence of the efficacy of recovery coaching. And if you take one step back up, you see that recovery coaching emerges in this idea, as you know, of recovery management. And recovery management sits, I think, William White talks about it as a bridgehead between the clinical medical model and the idea of the self-help groups, both of which are a form of membership and of a partners. Recovery management sits at the bridgehead, bridging both these worlds. And the point being is actually it takes all these ideas and says, well, there's lots and lots of ideas out there. If the singular goal of recovery is recovery, why don't we grab everything and see what works for people? And out of that emerges the recovery coach in the literature really as an alternative to a sponsor, which is a peer, or a counsellor or doctor or psychiatrist or therapist who is also a peer by virtue of their professional knowledge. And then it stops there. And all we really get to know about the recovery coach is that he or she is likely to have been involved in recovery themselves, probably from a personal point of view. And actually, though this person is essentially a bit like a team manager with the coachee in terms of coordinating the access to lots of different ways of lots of different recovery support services, it is by virtue of their experience in recovery that kind of grafts them into the situation rather than what are they doing as a coach. And I think that was the single most important finding, was that recovery coaching was all about the coaching. And if we look at what that means, is what actually my experience for myself in recovery, for example, may inform the discussion, it may not. It may need to be disclosed, it may not. But actually it's not so important. What's important is that we're a relationship of equals between the coach and the coachee. We have access to a whole bunch of different processes, coaching models. We are goal-centered rather than being pathologically driven. And we have a singular sort of supporting goal in the journey of recovery by any means possible, but that is client-driven and client-centered, which is obviously all the hallmarks of any form of coaching that you know, and the same to be said for recovery coaching. And if we take that one step further, it turns actually the recovery literature on its head. And the reason being is that because in the recovery literature, recovery is something that is done to people. Whereas recovery coaching is something that the client does for themselves. We are just, as coaches, orchestrating the process and conducting maybe a process that the client chooses and then ultimately fulfills. Which doesn't mean it's for everybody, but it means it's for some people. But gone is the assumption that that person is helpless, hopeless, and broken and needs a doctor to tell them what to do, or needs the group and the big book to tell them what to do. They decide their future. The coach is simply a participant in that journey. And that quality, that possibility, that potential for me was mind-blowing.
Tell us more about that, the mind-blowing part.
Because we assume that a person who's being labelled an addict is unable to actually do anything about it. And I don't mean that in a bad way, it's the way that it has come about. But it is horses for courses. Some people, if you tell them that they are not able to sort themselves out, won't be able to sort themselves out. Some people who are probably quite capable of making the changes required to lead a better life, of which one of the consequences might be being free from addiction. You tell them that they can do it, they probably can. But if you tell people who can do it that they probably can't either. So in some respects, we're opening up a whole different avenue of potential. We're saying, actually, we're not the expert, you are, which is just the basic hallmark of coaching. But the fact that it's applicable to recovery, or may be applicable to certain people, I'm not saying all people, it just changes the whole, it gives you access to so many more tools with which to help people. And let's be honest with you, this is about the people who are seeking recovery, not about us or people who are working in the industry. It's about the person to whom recovery is sought, or by whom recovery is sought. And I think that is where, and if you look at the literature again, recovery management gets to this idea of managing lots of different services. And there are lots of different ways we can get to recovery. And that is based on the real experience of people who have recovered, as it were. However, it doesn't take the next step, which is saying, well, actually, what role does the individual have in that? And that's where the research got to by interviewing the coaches who had worked with people. It was basically affirming that the coaching process, things like contracting, relationship, the models used, the idea of trust, et cetera, allowed that person to then create an awareness around what was going on, and most importantly, to take responsibility for what they were going to do to change it. And that, for me, was mind-blowing, because it goes back to Whitmore, the idea that it's all about raising awareness and taking your responsibility. And that enables lasting change, and self-belief is the motivator. And that applied to recovery coaching as well. And that, for me, yes, I would have liked to have found it before I set out. I didn't necessarily think I was going to, but it was evident through the interviews of the people who had worked, or the coaches who had worked with people as a recovery coach. And it took the literature, it said, we know where the literature stops, but it takes it one step forward, which is exciting thing. Then people can actually then say, well, based on that, what more can we explore? What are the experiences of the people who were coached by recovery coaches in terms of their own recovery, rather than the research I did, which was just research on the experience of recovery coaches. So there's a whole different avenue now, I think, that people can actually look to, and the research can move down that road.
Just tell us quickly about your research methodology and the structure of it all, just so, because if we're going out there and we're advocating multiple pathways to recovery, that the client isn't pathologized, they're able to take part in coming up with a solution for their recovery, that the recovery coach's role is to improve the relationship between the client and the services that they're using that make up their recovery. It is really kind of challenging the pathology of the illness, and therefore then challenging the medical institutions. And we get into that argument where coaching and therapy, trying to manage that kind of the tension between, this isn't a pathology, this is coaching, the person's not sick, but we're working with people originally that have been diagnosed as ill. So we then need to back the argument up with research, and I just want people to understand what your research methodology was.
So my methodology was, I took obviously it was a qualitative piece, so I wasn't looking for hard data. I was looking really to examine the experiences of people. And because the research literature ended with this idea that recovery coaching was emerging as a possible useful coordinator of services, but fundamentally was driven by that recovery coach's experience in recovery, so as a sort of super sponsor in some respects. I thought that the next step that might be useful would be to research recovery coaches themselves. And in order to look at their experiences in a total, with literally a blank canvas, because very little is known about recovery coaching, other than maybe they're likely to have come from a recovery background, but we know nothing about coaching. I thought I'd take a sort of free-form approach. So I chose a narrative study. And the main reason behind that is because we're not necessarily looking, we're not going for any preconceived ideas. It's going to be an inductive approach. And I wanted the people I was interviewing to have as much freedom to explore exactly what they felt as recovery coaches. And so the narrative approach really asks people to tell a story. And I also thought that if you take a narrative approach, if you follow Reisman's sort of methodology of how she builds to create a narrative, it's all about coaching. You contract. It's confidential. You encourage them to tell their own story. It's an environment of trust. So the setting up of the interview, as it were, is actually very much conducive to creating a narrative. Is very similar to that of the coaching relationship. And I thought that would work well when I was interviewing coaches. They would understand that this was a dialogical approach. We were equals in this. I wasn't some bespectacled expert in any field whatsoever. I just wanted them to tell a story. I then thought I would guide them, obviously within the boundaries of the research methodology, was basically by homing in on something quite specific, because the research had to be specific. And so I wanted to hone in on the experiences of recovery coaches, coaching professionals in recovery from alcohol misuse. I chose professionals because that would be a certain portion of people who were looking for recovery. No other reason than that, really. And secondly, basically from alcohol misuse, simply because it basically brought it down to another more honed-in level, and because alcohol is legal, whereas drugs aren't. So it takes out the illegal element of it, which might complicate things further, particularly in a professional conversation where the use of alcohol is legal, so therefore it's a different environment than if you're maybe sort of bound to be using drugs, etc., etc. So professionals in recovery from alcohol misuse was the deliberate targeting of the recovery coach's experience. And then I asked a question, which, what are your experiences? And I framed it with 4 sub-questions, which were, you might want to tell us, or what were the challenges you encountered? What were some of the coaching processes you used? What were some of the outcomes you found? And what were some of the challenges you encountered? Which were the 4 sub-questions relating to my thesis, just to guide the conversation. And then it was a free narrative. And I opened less well at the start than I did towards the end, because I learned as well in terms of how to ask a question. But the aim was to let the coach just talk, because experiences are unique to him or her. And what were those experiences? And it was up to me then to find the data within that. So that was the narrative approach to interviewing, and it worked really well. It worked so well because every transcript generated was entirely different. Though we are talking similar people, recovery coaches with some, I think I said a 12-month experience for coaching recovery professionals, and had to be credentialed by UACT or the FRC, so there was a level of training, uniformity of training, etc., etc. But it was like a different story each time, and each story had a unique perspective. And that only came through, obviously, when I was looking at the data itself, and I didn't necessarily think it was going to create such a diverse narrative, but it did. And I think that was the beauty of the narrative process, which is a wonderful way to do qualitative research personally. You know, a semi-structured interview, I think, would have been too rigid, because we don't know a huge amount about recovery coaching. So how could it be rigid was really the kind of the difficulty in that. And then having had the interviews went between 50 minutes and an hour and 50 minutes, so just under 2 hours. I then wrote each interview by hand, or obviously on a computer, but I then wrote it down from audio to Word myself. I didn't outsource that. And I think that was one of the big differences by doing that, which takes a hell of a long time. It
Rather you than me. That's why I didn't complete my research.
No, it was, David, it was brutal, I must be honest with you. But it meant the data was all there. It was all in my head.
Okay.
And I lived it. And I felt, whilst I was going through it, I was starting to form conclusions and, sort of areas for to write about, etc., etc. So having got 7 transcripts, which I think were 80,000 words long in total, I then went to a form of narrative data analysis. And I used these 2 Scandinavians, Blom and Nygren, which I found I was quite fortunate to find them. But without going into too much detail, what they did is they gave structured ways of how to attack the data. And what I liked about it was they basically said the first thing you do is you write a long paragraph called the naive understanding of the transcript. So this was just a summary of the transcript as I found it. And I did that for each interview.
Okay.
I then had to write a summary of a combination of all the transcripts. And in that, you found the homogeneity of everything. There, you see the common threads going through by recovery coaches talking about their experiences coaching professionals in recovery from alcohol. And only then did I move to a structural breakdown of each transcript separately. So what you do is you're preserving the case centers. You take each case by case by case. We're not looking for common themes to write about. We're looking at the differences in each case. And then when I broke it down and did all the data coding and all that, having then found all the codes, we then looked at what themes could I find through the codes that would bind them together, but were also different. And those I then basically aggregated into the 4 sub-questions of my research question, which was, what were the goals, what were the processes, what were the outcomes, and what were the challenges? And each interview had a little bit more of one particular of those 4, and a couple straddled each one. But again, I said I wasn't looking for the commonality. Narrative research looks for the differences, the case-centered nature of it. And then I wrote it up in that basis. Having analysed the case-centered nature, we talked about what was similar, but actually it was the perspective of each that was really interesting. So that was the methodology.
So you came in with your mindset of having experienced your own recovery process, which was, is it okay to talk about that, by the way? I mean, you mentioned it in the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, okay. So you had your own kind of treatment experience and your own recovery experience and a way of doing things, yeah, like based on what's worked for you. What has changed now that you understand coaching and multiple pathways to recovery and the client's not sick and all that sort of stuff? How did it change your thinking?
Do you know, it consolidated something that I actually shared with you when we did the training. That the very first day we met for your training, I remember I rode back, and I told you this on the motorcycle back to Heart Bay. And I was sitting there, and I remember the sort of voices in my head saying, well, what David is saying is that there are many paths to recovery. Now, I came from a rehab and a 12-step path to recovery, ostensibly, I guess. But it got me thinking that actually also, what was the work that I had done in driving my own recovery? Well, yes, I had been encouraged to go to rehab, but I'd stayed. Yes, I'd been encouraged to go and sit there for 6 weeks, but I chose to do the step work and to speak to the counsellors and take part in group. Yes, I was nervous about when I left, but I embraced that nervousness and thought, you know something, you've got to face your demons when you go out there. Yes, I chose to do 90 meetings in 90 days, but I chose to go to those meetings. And into that, I thought to myself, well, what were the actions that I chose to do? I also chose to, at some point up in the near future, I was going to change my career. So there was lots of action that I took in that as well. And I remember thinking about that as I rode home after the first day, that if there are multiple paths, and AA is only one way, but most importantly, what was my action in terms of getting sober and staying sober? So this research, I think, took that and affirmed that, because it just said that nobody's saying there is only one way. And of course we need intervention. Of course the medical model is required in many instances where people are, mentally ill or need hospitalization or whatever it is, etc. There's lots of validity to it, but it isn't the only way. And that AA is another way that you keep coming back, and if you work it, you will work it, and all those buzzwords. It works brilliantly for people, but actually there are a whole bunch of ways that are available, and they're as different and diverse as the people themselves. But most importantly too, there is room for some people, and not all people, we're not saying all people, to make their own decisions about the recovery, to use the resources that are around, to build on their own assets, to build on their relationships, to build on whatever support system they had to get out of bed that day, to build their recovery on that. And it was that potential that I got so excited about. That if you tell people that something's possible, it gives them infinite other options. If you tell them it isn't possible, you shut down all those options. And I wonder how many people we're losing because we don't actually tell them, or should we say encourage them, to explore their own resources, whatever they are, to determine their own recovery. And that's what the coaching reaffirmed. So it was all about that coaching.
Had you met a coach prior to your intervention? Would you have done things differently?
Absolutely. I think in my case, being a business leader in the investment banking world, I think, I hope I would have been open to it. I've changed a lot in my own recovery, but maybe I wouldn't have been. But I'm hoping that, you see, before I got into rehabilitation, I saw a couple I saw a psychiatrist, I saw a psychologist. And I remember getting nothing out of it. I came out there and all I felt was that, well, I don't feel sick and I don't feel this and that, whatever. And I, wasn't willing to go through and do a whole bunch of other tests saying, were you this or were you that or whatever. I believe that if I'd worked with a coach that had actually, in my situation, maybe held my professional and my personal agendas together, I believe it could very well have been useful. I'm not necessarily saying it might have worked, but it could have been useful for me to explore the other avenues. Because when it came down to it, when work basically told me you had to do the rehabilitation, that was the only option, and it opened up an entire new pejorative avenue for me, certainly in my career, which is also fun, that's the way it is. But by ticking the yes box, I effectively shut down my career in many respects. And when I ticked the yes box, I was under so much pressure to tick it that I couldn't think of any other thing other than just ticking that box. And a coach might have helped me explore other avenues. What other avenues were there? To be brutally honest with you, I didn't know.
Well, no,
I didn't know.
This is what the challenge is, and this is where I think your kind of hard-earned experience is kind of pioneering in a way. Because I've taken this view also for a long time that when dealing with a successful businessman in the banking world is a very different way of dealing with when you're dealing with an antisocial that's kind of facing jail time for their addictive behavior. And that the guys are on different ends of the continuum. One is kind of antisocial criminal kind of behavior. And on the other hand, there's a real responsible, productive kind of person that's functioning within the business world that is kind of burning out. And I mean, one will never say, could never kind of confirm it, but had the workplace been better skilled at dealing with your issue, just like when the workplace had been better skilled dealing with my issue, I think we would have had a better outcome for all, which would have been emotionally more productive and financially better for everyone as well. But of course, we won't know that.
No, and I think that's and that came through too in terms of the actual, back to the thesis was that's why I focused on professionals in recovery. There is a level of functionality to a professional who is using alcohol or misusing alcohol. And none of that means you're better or worse. It just is. And just like there are different forms of leg fracture, for example, there are different ways of setting a leg. And in some respects, it's the same there. There's a different level of functionality and a different level of involvement. There is a company involved. There are families involved. There is the individual involved. And it's a different dynamic to someone, for example, who isn't employed, who may have just the family interests, but there isn't an organizational interest. And there aren't the certain forward liabilities, for example, of being a professional with families to feed and mortgages to pay and all those things. So it's just a different set of circumstances, which may require a different set of services. And I think you've got me thinking there is what it does here. It celebrates the diversity in recovery rather than it's a one-size-fits-all. Go to rehab or go to AA or do both, and that's it. Or the dual diagnosis model, etc. is if we fix this, then the addiction will fall away, etc., etc. Coaching celebrates the diversity of the individual and allows them to have a voice. So rather than being the object of dialogue, they become a part of the dialogue. And that makes it breathe easy in the research, because if you make someone a part of the dialogue, it's an entirely different conversation. And if we come back to what you just said about the people who are professional holding down jobs, as a subset of people, not better, not worse, just people, the reality is that they will want to be part of the dialogue. And they'll expect to be part of the dialogue. And when you don't allow them to be part of the dialogue, which was certainly what happened in my case, well, resentment builds and fighting builds. And I don't see how that outcome really can be positive, recovery or no.
So often using coaching as part of an intervention process like they do in the workplace, they'll bring in business coaches to help change a culture of an organization to align with the new strategy. So coaching is often used as an intervention tool in business. When we use coaching, recovery coaching as an intervention to address an addictive behavior, a systemic problem, that when you involve all the role players and get them aligned, you have a better outcome. So, and when you're working with the client, it's working with resistance. Yeah? So working with change, and it might be seen as kind of motivational interviewing. So I think what's happening is with the business coaching and recovery coaching in general, a lot of what coaching is doing is now touching the points of therapy or treatment. But we mustn't get caught of falling in the pathology trap. Coaching is an intervention that is used to create wellness for the belief is the system's already functioning and is able to adjust itself. As opposed to an organization like, oh my God, we've got this person here, they got a drinking problem, let's bring in an outsider to come and fix a problem and tell us what to do.
Exactly. And tell that person who's being scrutinized also what to do.
Exactly. Okay.
And in that respect, I think what you're saying, or what you're hinting at, is another thing that I believe as well, is actually in this context. So just to define it again, coaching professionals, as to say, with alcohol misuse issues or whatever you want to call it, or call it alcohol still, is actually in some respects, is that actually it's a subset of performance coaching. And we then open up this whole idea that actually, for example, that this person who is working in this corporate environment starts to underperform, and one discovers that the misuse of alcohol is a result and a part of that underperformance. So whatever basis it is, are you able to engage it on a coaching level? So you engage with a coach who then happens to move into recovery coaching, because that's where the conversation led by the client leads to. And suddenly, if you take it as part of a, we're not dealing with this stigma. Go see the psychologist, you've got a drinking problem, which is actually where we're at on a corporate basis. And suddenly you've got a problem. Go fix it. The underperformance is locked in, the stigma is attached. Ooh, you're going to work hard to survive that in any corporate environment, certainly in this part of the world. Whereas now we talk about performance, and I'm working, doing some coaching or whatever, and sometimes it comes, performance or underperformance comes from so many different places. And so often it's personal, and it's not revealed by any of the various forms filled in, the PMOs and all that the corporates do, because it's deeply personal. And the relationship reveals that. And if it happens to be around substance, well, the coach can take that away as well, without the pejorative status. And that comes again to, certainly in the organizational systemic context that you often talk about. Suddenly you think, wow, that actually, the coach is really there for the welfare of our people. And in cultures that do have a genuine belief in the welfare of those people as key determinant in their success, which all the research suggests it is, then it's a valuable service. Can I add, sorry, David? That just occurred to me as well is that, just going back to the research, is that one of the reasons which seems to me the research gets so jammed, or the opinion gets so jammed on all this, is that actually we get to the stage where there are two parts of the recovery puzzle. There's recovery and there's abstinence. And you and I have talked about this before. And that most of the research uses the term recovery to mean abstinence. And that actually getting abstinent is recovery. So recovery management finds that abstinence is the likely departure point for recovery. But people can be working on recovery and in recovery prior to abstinence. And one of the coaches I interviewed was particularly talking about a person they worked with, whereby, as he said, I wasn't bothered with him using. We were talking about recovery. I knew eventually that they would probably become abstinent. But we weren't judging. We were talking about what he wanted to talk about, where he wanted to go with it. And that turns the cart and the horse relationship completely around. So a recovery coach is working with people who are non-abstinent. Well, that flattens the medical model and it flattens the AA model, because abstinence is a criteria. It doesn't mean everyone is abstinent in AA, but it is the precursor immediately to sobriety. The medical model is about getting you abstinent. Why? Because then when you're out, they've got to deal with a wall of people coming in. And abstinence is static, and it leads to, there's one thread that goes through the thesis that, for me, excites me most about all of this, is this idea of movement. Is that actually coaching is about getting people moving. If they can see potential, if they can find purpose, if they can look at their own ideas of meaning, if they can look at possibilities, actually you're not stuck in the mud of abstinence. Abstinence is either true or it's not true. Recovery isn't. It's grey. It's individual. It's personal. It can go on for 30 years. It is infinitely varied. Abstinence either is or it isn't. And if we just focus on abstinence, we miss the whole point of recovery.
So you've just been at Stellenbosch Business School.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. What were some of the other so you've got business leaders all coming together, seeing how coaching can assist different organizations, and you focus specifically on recovery coaching. what I'm curious about is from your interaction in a business school, what other kind of coaches are out there and how recovery coaching can be seen as a business intervention, another tool that a business could use.
Yeah, it was very much skiing off piste there, David. I mean, I said I was thrilled when they agreed to let me do it. And, you know, I absolutely take my hat off them for supporting me in it. And, you know, it's worked well for every party. But at the first call, it was like, okay, well, you know, the brief was it needs to have a business angle and it needs to be about coaching. Now go forth type thing. And sharing it with some of the people who we had, you know, sort of triads with and group stuff with and whatever, and having to do the presentations, the eyebrows that were raised, it was fantastic, which I loved, of course, no surprises there. But it was like, and at one point they said to me, well, you know, aren't you treading on the toes of psychologists here? And I said, I'm not trying to tread on any toes whatsoever. We are just looking at what the research says and what we find. And they bought into that, and they were brilliant about that. And once they looked at that, they said, you know, so we can understand the business angle this is coming from. And we can understand that, yes, it's a subset of performance coaching. But the caveat being is that you need to interview the coaches. I.e., there was a level removed from the people who had been participants in coaching. And that then kept it on a professional basis as well. And I think their challenge, they were quite surprised as well, are you going to find any coaches doing this? So the wonderful thing is we have a network of people who will help me do that, like yourselves and Anthony. And that was the beauty of it. But it was a complete, oh, okay, yeah. But as we then presented, and I talked about it, and as the one thing they always said about this is your passion for the topic shines through. And that's one of the reasons why we want you to run with it, because if you're not passionate about your thesis, it's not going to work. And it was that passion, and I was lucky in the end. I had 3 or 4 different supervisors come up and say, I really want to take this on. And I chose Dr. Ruth Alberton, who was my supervisor, which was absolutely brilliant. But it was like kind of now that they get it and they understand, and that's why it was a bit like skiing through the woods rather than on the piste. But they got it in that respect. And the support since, you know, having completed it has been absolutely fantastic, and the feedback was wonderful.
And what's the next step? How do we get this into business?
Well, what I'm going to do, David, is I've agreed to write the thesis into a journal article and get it into a peer-reviewed journal. And I thought we'd try for the Harvard Coaching Review, the ISC publication. And I've got help. I will have help getting that to the senior editor. I'm now going to write it. And I think if we can get this out there and just to create awareness, and the whole aim was really to create a basis for more research. Next level would be for someone else to go out there and grab some research and start researching what were the experiences of people being coached by recovery coaches. Maybe in the context I chose, because we are talking business and we're talking professionals. And we're not trying to say this works for everyone. It may work for a certain group of people who are probably outcomes focused, goal centered, understand customers, etc., things like that. So business people, which is, again, the feedback from the coaches, it tended to work quite well with people from that sort of background. But I think we can get the journal article, just get the awareness out there and take it from there. And if we can get that journal article published, get it up on various websites, etc., get it maybe distributed by social media, it could be a start.
Just kind of bottom line it though, like it's going to take a while to kind of convince the other people, but me and you are converted. And I just want in your words, your own words, why this would be good for business. Why would an organization want to go and bring in recovery coaching skills within their organization?
Because I think it could save a lot of people.
Save them from?
Well, people from the loss of institutional capital from businesses. You know, if you lose 1 or 2 senior people through something that really can be engaged with, then you're losing quality people, you're losing all that knowledge, etc. And I think if we can create awareness around it, and actually above and beyond the idea that firms look after the welfare of their people, we can talk that to we're black and blue. The reality is that firms look to the bottom line. We know that, but they would like to look for the welfare of their people, and happy people tends to lead to a happy customer. But that's too nebulous. If we can actually portray it as this is another option, rather than going down the prescribed route, which is the company handbook, HR, and into the medical model, that there are other options that can engage with people. One, you're offering a support system to your staff, and two, you might retain one or two good people that you really don't need to lose. And in a country like this, where good people are hard to find, and loss of people is always the case, and any company, I think, trying to retain your good people is a core part of the longevity of your business. This only adds to that. And if you can put it under the idea that it is part of performance coaching, you can take away, if it is about, what does recovery mean? Oh dear, we don't really understand that actually performance coaching covers all aspects of your performance at a personal and professional level.
You see, where I'm thinking this is could be beneficial for organization is when we have an alcoholic come in for treatment, the alcoholic's behavior has impacted not only him but the family as well. So the family unit goes into recovery. So the system goes into recovery, and then in the workplace where a team is doing badly or the business is doing badly, you can use recovery coaching as a way to create recovery within the business by getting all the different role players to talk and get aligned. So just like in a family, you get the whole family to kind of understand the alcoholic's behavior and thinking, and then you kind of clean up the past and you look at your own behavior and you kind of look at the way that you respond and the family healing that needs to happen. When the family moves from the dysfunction and learns how to function, the workplace environment is operating at dysfunctional level, and you can use recovery coaching to come in and to kick the out of that dysfunction and get it to function. So that's where I'm personally kind of think that this is a great skill set for people that have to turn businesses around.
Yeah. And I think the point you make there is that, or it's in line with what I'm saying as well, is that actually it's a performance issue. And if we, aside from all the other stuff, and it's way more complex than that, but if we make it a performance issue, you can bring this work in under performance coaching, because the recovery does sound off alarm bells immediately, because the obvious assumption is that this poor person is making a bottle of gin before they drive the tractor, which is usually not the case. So, and I was thinking about my own some of the stuff that came out of the woodwork when I was accused of when I negotiated my business, but that's another story. But it's that healing, that idea of integrating with the team. You've got a senior manager whose performance is gone awry because of the misuse of alcohol, for example, and you work with that individual to bring them back in. There's that reintegration process. There's that trust building again between the team and that individual. And there you're coaching on many, many levels. And it's actually, in many respects, it's not a leadership issue, it's a performance issue. And I think then that's why I think that to push this into a business context, we need to bring it in as a performance coaching subset, simply to get through this idea that recovery immediately sets off the alarm bells. Oh, it's a legal thing, it's a psychological thing, it's something we just want off our books.
What's your next step, Thoby?
David, I'm pushing out the sort of the business coaching that I'm doing. I'm going to do some consulting work here in this office here at the moment, but the plan is I'm pushing myself as a performance coach, as you can probably gather from my language, but is to work with senior people in business on all aspects of performance. There's got to be a personal angle for me. for me to really get to feel the purpose in this work. And I often think something, it seems to me that performance can be something so simple. But if coaching actually operates, or executive coaching operates at the intersection of the personal life and the business life, the key to that performance exists in both spheres. So I'd like to bring that performance work to senior business people in this country, and I've got some customers and clients in London as well. But it's the performance angle and the ability to not be afraid to work on the personal side. And so therefore I'm looking for businesses who are happy to explore that through the confidentiality agreement, i.e., I don't want to coach about business values and all the things that are put down from HQ and stuff. I've got no interest. There's other coaches who can handle all that. I'm much rather interested in performance. So like a performance coach that works with an athlete, what's going wrong? Is it nutritional? Is it training? Is it undersleeping, oversleeping, over-partying? Is it relationships? Whatever it is, how are you working with that individual to fulfill his or her potential to win that race? And recovery coaching forms a part of that. Nutritional work also forms a part of that as it presents itself. It might just be leadership. It might be nothing. It might just be negativity. Maybe it's depression and you need to move them on. Whatever it is. But that's where I want to go with it. But I'm taking recovery as a subset, recovery coaching as a subset of that. I do quite a bit of private recovery work as well, recovery coaching work as well, which I do either voluntarily or paid, depending on what you can afford. And I love it. I love it. But that's kind of what I see my soul work, as it were. And I'll continue to do that. But I would love to get this into the executive world, even by stealth.
I'd love you to get your stuff in there too. All right, mate, let's start wrapping up the interview. Did doing this improve your marriage?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. So it wasn't one of those MBAs that kind of ended in divorce.
No. You know, I think it was my boys. My eldest boy was the one who was just like, oh God, Dad's studying again this weekend. It's so boring. But no, it was fantastic because my missus knew it was something that I wanted to do. And she also knew I would give it my all, which I really did. I mean, I really worked very hard at it. I worked very hard. And there was lots of times where you just think, oh my God, another evening where I could be just watching telly or, you know, whatever. But there it was, reading through another research report saying, oh my God, how many more do I have to read? But it was my passion for it, really, that I think shone through. So no marital difficulties with it at all.
Good stuff. I'm really pleased. And thank you so much for your contribution. I'm very, very proud of you. And thank you for really dedicating your time to the cause. So,
no, my pleasure, man. Always here. And I will give you a shout when I come up to Jersey. Love to see you.
Okay, mate. I'll talk to you later.
Thanks, man. Cheers, mate. Bye.